The arrival of winter in the Japanese archipelago is not a subtle affair, particularly when one moves away from the temperate southern coast and into the rugged spine of the central mountains or the northern reaches of Tohoku and Hokkaido. For the inhabitants of ancient and medieval Japan, winter was a technical challenge of the highest order. It was a season that defined the logistics of survival, dictating every movement from sunrise to sunset. To understand how they thrived, one must first look at the environment they faced, a landscape where freezing temperatures were not merely a seasonal nuisance, but a permanent environment factor for months on end. In the mountain villages, the snow did not just fall, it accumulated, often reaching depths that would isolate entire settlements for weeks. The primary challenge was the plummeting temperature combined with the high humidity of the island geography, which made the cold feel sharper and more penetrating than in drier continental climates. Historical records indicate that Okekln was entirely centered around thermal retention. Unlike modern buildings designed for aesthetics or sprawling floor plans, the homes of this era were survival machines. The walls were constructed using a mix of mud, bamboo and straw, a combination that provided surprising insulation once sealed, but required constant maintenance to prevent cracks from letting in the biting wind. This was not a life of leisure. From the moment the first frost coated the fields, the pace of life shifted. The focus turned to energy conservation, both in terms of fuel and human stamina. The agricultural cycles were already completed, the harvest had been processed and stored, and the focus now moved to the interior of the home. The hearth was not just a source of warmth, it was the heart of the home's mechanical function. It dictated where people slept, where they cooked, and how they moved. The entire household layout was designed to keep the most vulnerable members closest to the heat source. It is important to understand that the survival of these communities was not based on luck, but on precise, time-tested physical systems. Everything from the pitch of the roof, designed to shed heavy snow loads, to the placement of the storage pits, was calculated to mitigate the impact of the cold. As we delve into the mechanics of their daily existence, we begin to see a pattern of extreme efficiency. Every resource, from the charcoal produced in autumn to the layers of hempen fabric worn against the skin, served a singular purpose: the preservation of body heat in an era before central heating or electricity. The channel Sleepy History with Benedict is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. The Japanese Minka, or traditional farmhouse, was a masterpiece of thermal engineering born of necessity. When looking at these structures, one must overlook the aesthetic beauty often associated with Japanese architecture and focus instead on the structural defense mechanism they provide against freezing temperatures. The roof was the most critical component. In regions like Shirakawa-go or the mountainous areas of Gifu, snow could easily reach 2 meters or more. To manage this weight, the steep, niched thatch roofs were designed with a dual purpose. They were steep enough to allow snow to slide off before it could crush the structure, and they were thick enough to act as a highly effective thermal blanket. The thatch, made primarily of Suzuki grass, was layered with remarkable precision. This material provided a natural insulation barrier that kept the interior temperature significantly higher than the exterior air. However, the true ingenuity lay in the ventilation system. The open hearth in the center of the living area produced constant smoke. Instead of allowing this smoke to accumulate and become a health hazard, the architecture utilized the space under the rafters as a drying zone. The smoke would rise, coating the exposed wooden beams and the underside of the thatch in a layer of soot and creosote. This served a double purpose. It acted as a preservative, preventing the wood from rotting in the humid mountain climate, and it hardened the thatch, making the roof more resistant to fire and wind. Windows in these structures were minimal, and in some of the oldest designs they were non-existent on the northern side of the house, which faced the coldest winds. Instead, the walls were thick panels of earth and plaster, acting as a thermal mass that would absorb heat from the hearth throughout the day and slowly release it in the living space at night. The transition from the outside cold to the interior of a minka was, in effect, a transition from one climate zone to another. Entryways were often designed with a vestibule or a small enclosed porch area that served as an airlock. This prevented the rush of freezing air from directly hitting the main living quarters whenever someone entered or left the dwelling. The interior floor layout was equally utilitarian. The living space was divided in the doma, the earthen floor near the entrance, and the hieroma, or raised wooden platform. The doma served as a workspace during the winter, where tools were repaired and heavy chores were completed. Because the ground remained cold, the elevate wooden floor was essential for comfort. By raising the living area, occupants voided the conductive cooling of the frozen ground. Beneath this floor, air circulation was limited, creating a buffer zone that helped maintain warmth. Every inch of the minka was calculated to minimize the surface area exposed to the element while maximizing the heat retention capabilities of the interior core. This was not a passive building. It was an active participant in the survival of the family residing within. At the very center of the minka, embedded in the earthen floor, sat the irori. To understand the survival of ancient Japanese households, one must view the irori not merely as a fire pit, but as the central engine of the home's ecosystem. It was the nexus of cooking, heating, and crucially, material maintenance. The pit itself was typically square, lined with stone or tiles, and filled with ash. This bed of ash was essential. It acted as a thermal regulator, holding on heat for hours, even after the flames had died down, and allowing the residents to control the intensity of the heat by burying or exposing the burning charcoal. The irori functioned through a vertical hierarchy of heat. Above the pit hung the jizakagi, an adjustable iron rod or bamboo pole, often carved in the shape of a fish, a symbol of water and a protective talisman against fire. By moving this rod up or down, the cook could control exactly how much heat the suspended iron pot received. This was the primary way of managing resources. During the winter, long simmering stews made of preserved vegetables and dried fish would be kept warm for the entire day, ensuring that no heat was wasted. The fuel source was almost exclusively charcoal, which was preferred over raw wood because it burned cleaner, produced less smoke, and generated a steady, intense heat without the frequent popping and sparking that could ignite the surrounding straw matting. The air around the irori was always the warmest, and this dictated the hierarchy of the household during the evening hours. The master of the house and the eldest family members would occupy the positions closest to the hearth. As one moved toward the periphery of the room, the temperature dropped significantly, which is why the outer areas were typically used for storage or as sleeping quarters for less senior members who would rely on heavy bedding and shared body warmth. The irori also played a role in the physical health of the home. The smoke rising from the fire helped keep the interior free of moisture, which was the greatest enemy of a wooden structure in the humid Japanese winter. Further, the irori was the hub of social and technical labor. During the long winter nights, when agricultural work was impossible, the family would sit around the hearth. To perform tasks that required dexterity, repairing fishing nets, weaving straw sandals, or mending clothing. This concentrated the human energy of the entire family around the single source of warmth. It was a highly efficient arrangement. It minimized the need for multiple fires in the house, which would have been a waste of precious charcoal, and it centralized all light, allowing the family to work well into the evening hours. In every sense, the irori was the technical foundation upon which the winter survival strategy of the Japanese household was built. While the hearth provided the thermal core of the dwelling, the primary defense for the individual was the management of clothing. In ancient and medieval Japan, the strategy was not about heavy, bulky protection, but about intelligent layering and the utilization of specific materials known for their insulating properties. The standard garment, the kimono, was surprisingly versatile when adapted for winter. It was not a single layer, but a system of fabric management. Beneath the outer kimono, individual wore multiple layers of kosode, the narrow, sleeved undergarment. By layering several kosode, one created pockets of dead air between the layers, which the body would naturally heat and maintain. The materials used were critical. Silk was prized by the elite, but the vast majority of the population relied hemp, linen, and, as the centuries progressed, cotton. However, these materials alone were not enough to combat freezing mountain temperatures. To increase the insulation value, garments were often padded. The process of sashiko, the art of decorative reinforcement stitching, was not merely an aesthetic choice, it was survival technique. By quilting multiple layers of fabric together with heavy thread, the clothing became sturdier and trapped more heat. This reinforced fabric was resistant to the harsh, tearing conditions of outdoor winter labor, such as gathering firewood or clearing snow. Footwear and extremities were the most difficult to manage. The traditional zori sandals, made of woven straw, were inadequate for deep snow. To combat the cold and moisture, people developed waraji, straw sandals with high, protective sides, often worn over tabi socks lined with additional layers of fabric or even straw insulation. In the deep snow, some regions utilized snowshoes made of bent wood and woven rope, which prevented the wearer from sinking and kept them somewhat separated from the freezing ground. Without modern synthetic waterproofing, the primary concern was keeping the feet dry. Once a pair of straw sandals became soaked with snow, they lost all thermal efficacy and had to be replaced immediately. Headgear and accessories were equally pragmatic. Hats were made of braided straw or thick felt to protect against the wind, while wide, brimmed straw hats served as makeshift umbrellas to keep snow from collecting on the shoulders and back. In the most severe conditions, individuals would use mino, a cape made of thick, overlapping straw or sedge. The mino was one of the most effective pieces of cold weather gear ever devised in Japan. Its layered shingled design caused snow and rain to shed off perfectly, while the natural oils in the straw provided a degree of water resistance that kept the layers beneath it dry. This system of layering allowed people to remain mobile and functional in temperatures that would otherwise lead to rapid hypothermia. Every layer served a specific purpose, and the failure of any one component could lead to significant physical discomfort or danger. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Benedict, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or document cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, events is purely coincidental. Survival in a sub-zero climate is, fundamentally, a matter of calorie management. During the winter months in ancient Japan, the metabolic demands on the human body increased drastically. Simply staying warm in a drafty structure required a significant amount of caloric fuel. The dietary strategy was therefore one of extreme efficiency, high energy density and preservation. Since fresh produce was unavailable for months in many regions, the pantry was a meticulously curated library of fermented, dried and salted goods. The staple was, as it remains, rice, but it was supplemented by hardier crops like buckwheat, millet, and barley grains that could withstand colder soil temperatures and provide more sustained energy during long, arduous days of outdoor labour. Preservation was the cornerstone of winter food security. The process of tsukamona vegetable pickling was not just about flavour. It was a sophisticated method of food storage. Vegetables like daikon radishes, cabbage, and turnips were harvested in late autumn and salted or fermented in large ceramic jars buried in the ground. These jars acted as a natural cellar, keeping the contents at a stable, cool temperature, preventing spoilage and concentrate the nutrients. By the time winter arrived, these pickled vegetables provide essential vitamins and minerals that were otherwise missing from a diet restricted to dried grains and preserved fish. Proteins were sourced from the sea and in waterways, preserved through dryings. Salted salmon, dried seaweed, and preserved legumes provided the necessary amino acids. In the mountains, preserved wild game and mushrooms were used sparingly, as these were limited resources. The way these items were consumed was as crucial as what was consumed. During the winter, meals were almost exclusively warm. The use of the irori meant that soups and broths were constantly on the simmer. These liquids packed mountain vegetables and bits of preserved protein were the primary way to rehydrate and warm the body from the inside out. For those of you finding these insights into the ingenuity of ancient survival compelling, consider subscribing to our channel. By joining our community, you support the continued creation of in-depth historic explorations that bring the everyday realities of the past to life. Your engagement helps us maintain the quality and depth of these narratives, ensuring we can continue to reconstruct the fascinating rhythms of life from centuries ago. The concept of nabe or hot pot cooking also originated from this necessity. By throwing available ingredients into a single pot with a flavorful broth, families could ensure that nothing went to waste and that everyone received a warm, nutrient-dense meal. This communal dining was a practical necessity. It centralized the heat source and minimized the effort required for food preparation. It was an elegant solution to the problem of maintaining health and stamina in a season where environmental conditions actively worked against the human body. Every meal was a tactic decision, a balance of what was stored, what was available, and the physiological needs of the family to endure the long freezing nights ahead. While the irori served as the primary heat source for collective, the management of localized warmth for individual was a matter of portable engineering. When family members had to move away from the central hearth to perform chores, whether in the storage area, the workspace, they relied on a variety of ingenious, small-scale heating devices. The most prominent of these was the kairo, an early form of a hand warmer. These were typically small, ceramic or metal vessels filled with a smouldering mixture of charcoal powder and dried wood dust. The container was designed to be held in the hands or placed inside a cloth pouch to be tucked in the folds of one's kimono. The engineering of the kairo was precise. The vents had to be sized perfectly to allow enough oxygen for the embers to glow. but not enough to cause the fuel to burn out too quickly or pose a fire risk to the fabric of the garment. It was a delicate balance that allowed a person to maintain a degree of mobility while keeping their core temperature from plummeting during brief periods of exposure. Such as those performed by artisans or farmers, anko or katatsu, bako were used. These were portable wooden frames containing a small ceramic brazier, which could be placed under a heavy quilt or a thick cloak to create a localized, mobile pocket of warm air. The use of charcoal was a central element of this portable heating economy. Charcoal production was a specialized industry that flourished in the forested regions. Oak and other hardwoods were slow, burned in kilns to create dense, long-lasting charcoal that produced minimal smoke. This was a critical distinction. In the cramped, poorly ventilated interior of an ancient home, carbon monoxide poisoning was a constant, albeit misunderstood, risk. The charcoal used for indoor heating had to be of the highest quality, thoroughly processed to remove volatile compounds. This required a high level of technical cooperation between the Mount Foresters, who managed the kilns and the village household that relied on their product. Beyond these tools, the household relied on the thermal mass of mundane objects. Stones heated in the coals of the irori would be wrapped in thick cloth and placed at the feet of the bedding at night. This provided a steady radiating heat that lasted for several hours as the occupants drifted off to sleep. It was a simple low-tech solution that effectively extended the warmth of the hearth into the sleeping quarters. Every aspect of the household inventory was designed with thermal utility in mind. Nothing was kept that did not serve a function in maintaining the balance against the cold. The efficiency of these tools is a testament to the fact that survival was not just about enduring the winter, but about maintaining a functioning product household, despite the environment constraints that dictated the rhythm of every single day. The challenge of winter in Japan was not merely an individual or household concern, it was a matter of community-wide logistics. In mountain village, where the snowfall could be measured in meters rather than centimeters, the survival of the settlement depended on the ability to remain functional as a collective unit. The first task of any village, once the autumn harvest was concluded, was the systematic organization of resources. Winter was a time when the village shifted into state of hibernation mode, where energy expenditure was strictly rationed. The clearing of paths between houses was the most immediate necessity. Snow was merely pushed aside. It was carved into tunnels and elevated walkways, ensuring that communication and movement between homes, communal storage, and the local shrine could continue even in the heart of a blizzard. The management of community storage was equally critical. Each village operated on a system of shared risk. Large communal storehouses, often elevated on stilts to keep them dry and away from rodents, contained the collective reserves of dried grains, salted vegetables, and firewood. These structures were built with the same architectural rigor as the individual homes, often using overlapping wooden shingles and reinforced joints to withstand the weight of accumulated snow. If a house were to suffer damage, a roof collapse due to snow weight, or a structural failure due to wind, the entire community was mobilized. The repair of a neighbor's home was not just an act of charity, it was a structural necessity to prevent the cold from affecting the surrounding cluster of buildings. Communication across the village during the deep winter months relied on a sophisticated understanding of the terrain. The landscape was marked by tall poles or markers to indicate where pathway existed beneath the deep snow. preventing travellers or villagers from straying in dangerous ravines or ice-covered streams. These markers were maintained as a communal duty. Furthermore, the village would assign shifts for monitoring the communal hearths or checking on the elderly and vulnerable who lived on outskirts. The village was a highly integrated, interdependent system. Survival was predicated on the assumption that no single household could survive the winter in isolation. The social structure of the village played a key role in the distribution of labour. During the winter, when agricultural work halted, the village elders and leaders would coordinate the indoor industries that kept the settlement economically viable. This included the production of straw goods, sandals, mats and ropes, which were essential not only for internal use, but also as trade items to be exchanged with lowland settlements once the spring thaw opened the mountain passes. The logistics of survival were thus intertwined with the economics of survival. Every member of the village, from the youngest children to the oldest residents, had a designated role in maintaining the thermal, dietary, and structural integrity of the community. It was a rigorous, highly disciplined environment where the harshness of the season acted as a constant pressure, ensuring that social cohesion was not just an ideal, but a survival imperative. The popular image of winter in ancient Japan often focused on stillness, but in reality, the season was a period of intense, disciplined industrial activity. When the fields were frozen and the soil was too hard for the plough, the entire population pivoted to secondary industries. This was not a time of rest. It was a time of production. The long winter nights were used to transform raw agricultural byproducts into finished goods, a practice that ensured the economic stability of the household and the village. The most common of these tasks was the processing of straw and hemp. Farmers would spend hours by the dim light of the irori, meticulously braiding rice straw into waraji sandals, mino, rain capes, and tatami mats. These were not just household necessities, they were vital trade commodities. Since many mountain villages were isolated by heavy snow, they relied on these high-demand portable goods to exchange for salt, metal tools, and fabric from the warmer lowlands. The production of these items required immense technical skill and stamina. Weaving fibers in durable, water-resistant cordage or textile was a repetitive, labour-intensive process that kept the fingers nimble and the body occupied. It was a form of industrial production that did not require power or heat beyond the central hearth, making it perfectly suited for the winter months. Another crucial winter industry was the processing of firewood and charcoal. While the bulk of the harvesting was done in the autumn, the refinement of fuel continued throughout the winter. Families would spend days splitting logs into uniform pieces that could be easily stacked and dried. The management of the charcoal kilns, located in the forests around the village, was a dangerous but essential task. Workers would have to navigate through deep snow to reach the kilns, manage the slow burn, and transport the finished charcoal back to the village. This provided a continuous supply of the heat-intensive fuel needed to keep the irori burning through the coldest months. To ensure our continued ability to produce these detailed historical investigations, we invite you to become a regular member of our channel's community. If this exploration of historical ingenuity has provided you with value, or prompted a new perspective on the resilience of human society, please consider subscribing. Your support directly facilitates the research and meticulous narrative construction required to share these stories. By subscribing, you help us sustain our mission to preserve and present these facets of human history, keeping the record of these past survival techniques accessible and engaging for all our viewers. Beyond textiles and fuel, winter was also the primary time for the maintenance and manufacture of tools. Woodworking was a key winter trade. The construction of buckets, barrels, and furniture required time and careful attention to the grain and moisture content of the wood. Using hand planes, saws, and chisels, artisans would create items that were built to last for generations. The quality of these tools was high because the labor was slow and deliberate. By the time the spring thaw arrived, the village would have a stockpile of goods ready for trade, a direct result of the disciplined, product use of the long, cold winter hours. It was a testament to the fact that for the people of ancient Japan, winter was never wasted. It was simply a different stage of a year-long cycle of productivity and survival. In the confined environment of a minka during the deep winter, where the air was thick with smoke from the hearth, and the living space was sealed to retain heat, the maintenance of hygiene was a significant operational challenge. It was not merely about personal cleanliness. It was a matter of health and the prevention of respiratory issues or skin conditions in an environment where ventilation was intentionally minimized. The primary concern was the accumulation of soot and the management of moisture. Because the interior wood was constantly coated in a fine layer of soot from the irori, daily sweeping of the floor mats, the tatami was a non-negotiable task. The tatami, woven from rush grass, trapped dust and soot, requiring regular cleaning to ensure the living area remained sanitary. The bathing culture also had to be adapted to the cold. While the luxury of a deep, hot water bath was often reserved for the wealthy or those living in volcanic regions with natural thermal springs, the average rural family relied on more modest methods. The most common was the taraburo or tub bath. A small, portable wooden tub would be placed near the hearth, where water could be heated in a large iron pot. This was a process of extreme efficiency. The water was reused and the temperature was kept at the absolute minimum needed for effective washing. This was not a moment of relaxation, but a task performed with precision to ensure that one remained clean, without exposing the body to the freeze air for any longer than absolutely necessary. Health maintenance was also deeply linked to the environment. The air, while smoky, was remarkably dry due to the constant heat of the fire. To counteract the effects of dry skin and respiratory irritation, families made use of simple, natural remedies. The use of oils derived from seeds, such as camellia oil, was a standard practice for protecting the skin against the harsh, biting wind and the drying effects of the indoor fire. The diet, high in fermented foods, was also understood to be a critical factor in maintaining the internal health of the body, supporting digestion and immunity in a time when infectious diseases could spread rapidly in close-quartered living environments. Furthermore, the management of waste and the organization of the household were handled with a strict division of tasks. The area near the doma was kept separate from the raised, living floor. Any tools or materials that could introduce moisture or filth in the living area were strictly sequestered in the outer sections of the house. This separation of clean and dirty spaces was a fundamental part of the household's design, ensuring that the limited living area remained a sanctuary. This was not merely a cultural quirk, it was a practical health strategy. By maintaining these boundaries and keeping the interior environment as clean as possible, families minimized the risks associated with living in a small enclosed and heavily used space for the duration of the long snowy season. It was an approach to daily life that prioritized function and order above all else, ensuring that even in the middle of a frozen winter, the household remained a stable and healthy environment. The end of the winter season in ancient Japan was not marked by a sudden arrival of warmth, but by a gradual, calculated transition. As the days lengthened, the survival focus shifted from heat retention to the preparation for the agricultural cycle ahead. The thawing of the snow was a logistical event in itself. The meltwater, if managed incorrectly, could cause flooding or damage the foundation of the home. So the clearing of drainage channels around the Minka and the village paths was the first order of business. This period, often carried by a mix of freezing mornings and mud-filled afternoons, required a new set of adaptive techniques. The transition also involved the comprehensive maintenance of the household infrastructure. The thatch of the roof, having served its purpose as a thermal barrier, had to be inspected for damage caused by the weight of the snow and the accumulation of ice. The soot-coated beams were cleaned, and the interior walls were often replastered. This was the time to clear out the residue of winter, decumulate ash from the hearth, the discarded straw from worn out sandals, and the remains of the storage containers. It was a thorough reset of the living space, ensuring that the home was structurally sound and prepared for the cycle of life to begin again. The diet also underwent a shift. As the last of the ferment vegetables were consumed, families began to look for the first signs of spring, wild mountain vegetables and sprouts. These fresh, bitter greens provide a necessary nutritional contrast to the heavy preserved foods of the winter months. The transition from the high-calorie, preservations diet of winter to the lighter, fresher diet of spring was a critical period for physical health, allowing the body to recalibrate after months of indoor living. This shift was marked by traditional community activities, the clearing of communal fields, the repair of irrigation tools, and the collective celebration of the returning life in the landscape. We hope you have found this detailed look at the mechanics of ancient survival both informative and engaging. If you enjoyed this exploration and want to stay updated on our future deep dives into historical life, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is the engine that allows us to continue crafting these stories, research the daily realities of the past, and bring them to life for you. Thank you for being a part of this journey into history. Ultimately, the survival of the Japanese people through the harshest winters was a testament to the power of human ingenuity, discipline, and communal cooperation. It was not a struggle against nature, but a highly effective negotiation with it. By building structures that worked with the climate, developing clothing systems that maximized thermal efficiency, and organizing their lives around the practical realities of their environment, they did more than just endure. They established a culture of resilience that defined their identity. As the spring blossoms finally emerged from the melting snow, the cycle of the year was complete, a cycle stained by the knowledge that the hardships of the past were simply the foundation for the successes of the future. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. Beyond the primary residence, the Japanese landscape in winter necessitated a specialized secondary architecture, the kura or storehouse. While the Minka provided heat for the living quarters, the kura was designed to provide absolute protection for the family's assets, grain, silk, precious tools and important documents against the triple threats of fire, dampness, and vermin. In the context of a snowy winter, the kura served as an essential logistics hub. Its construction was radically different from the main house. The walls were thick, often built from heavy timber frameworks covered in multiple layers of fire-resistant clay, which was smoothed and hardened until it could withstand the severe thermal contraction and expansion caused by plummeting temperatures. These structures were frequently elevated on stone foundation wooden stilts to isolate them from the freezing, moisture-laden ground. This design choice was not merely about structural stability, it was a sophisticated method of humidity control. In winter, moisture was the silent predator that could ruin stored grain or cause fabric to rot. By lifting the kura above the snow line and ensuring airflow beneath the structure, the humidity within the storage space was kept at a manageable level. The roof of the kura was typically covered with heavy tiles or thick thatch, often featuring an interlocking design that prevented drifting snow from working its way into the joints during high, winter storms. Access to the kura was a measured operation. The doors were double-layered, heavy wooden slabs that could be locked with iron bolts, creating an airtight seal that kept the interior environment stable regardless of the outside blizzards. Because opening the kura during winter would allow a rush of cold, humid air into the protected space, it was designed to be accessed as infrequently as possible. Farmers would plan their winter supply draws in advance, retrieving large quantities of grain or supplies in one go to minimize the number of times the protective seal was broken. This was a logistical discipline that defined the pace of winter life. Every trip to the storehouse was an intentional, calculated event. The ingenuity of the kura extended to its fire safety. Given the intense reliance on charcoal and open flames in the main minka, the risk of a village-wide fire was a constant threat. The kura, with its thick clay-coated walls, acted as a firebreak. In the event of a hearth accident, the kura was the fortress where the family's livelihood was secured. This separation of living space and storage space was a fundamental lesson in risk management that guided the planning of every farmstead in the northern regions. It demonstrated an advanced understanding, material science and environment protection that allowed rural communities to safeguard their resource through months of isolation. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. In the mountainous regions of Japan, winter was not just a battle against temperature, it was a battle against the physics of water. The management of water resource during the months of heavy snowfall was a critical engineering feat that dictated the survival of the village infrastructure. When the ground froze and the rivers became sluggish, the primary concern was preventing the blockage of vital water channels and mitigating the risk of ice-related structural damage. Farmers and village engineers had to be proactive in managing the flow of mount streams that supplied the community with water for daily use and livestock maintenance. The most common technique for preventing water systems from freezing was the strategic use of flow. Stagnant water would freeze almost instantly, so channels were designed with specific slopes and depth profiles to maintain a constant, steady current. By keeping the water in motion, villagers prevented the formation of solid ice, which could burst wooden pipes or crack the stone-lined trenches used for irrigation and household supply. In areas where springs were the primary source, They were often covered or enclosed in small stone-built structures to retain the earth's natural thermal warmth, ensuring that the water remained liquid even when the ambient air temperature dropped well below freezing. When the inevitable thaw began, the engineering focus shifted to drainage. The sudden influx of meltwater from the upper slopes posed a significant threat to the village foundations. To prevent erosion and flooding, villagers constructed intricate networks of drainage ditches, lined with rocks to stabilize the soil and direct the runoff safely away from the residential clusters and storehouses. These ditches were inspected and cleared of debris before the first heavy snows arrived, ensuring that when the spring melt finally started, the water had a clear, predetermined path. This system was not a static one. It was constantly adjusted throughout the winter as snow levels shifted and drainage patterns changed. The management of meltwater was also a vital task for the preservation of the home. The heavy wet snow that accumulated around the base of the Minka had to be managed to prevent it from seeping into the wooden floor joints. By creating deep angled trenches around the perimeter of the house, villagers ensured that the meltwater drained away into the subsoil rather than pooling against the timbers. This was a sophisticated, if primitive, form of environment control that allowed the home to remain dry and structurally sound. Every village had its own localized knowledge of the terrain, understanding where the drifts would form and where the water would flow, demonstrating a highly practical and localized mastery of hydrology that was essential for navigating the long frozen transition of the winter months. In a landscape dominated by timber, framed structures and dry thatched roofs, the domestic use of fire was a high-stakes daily operation. The irori, while essential for survival, represent a constant risk to the very structure that provided shelter. Managing this required a specialized set of protocols regarding fuel selection and fire maintenance. The most critical component was the quality of charcoal. Charcoal was not a singular product. It was graded by its heat intensity, burn time, and residual smoke. For indoor heating, farmers prioritized white charcoal, binkotan, or high-density hard charcoal, which burned at a lower, consistent temperature with minimal sparking. Sparking was the primary hazard, as a single errant ember could ignite the straw mats or the dry wooden rafters. To mitigate this, the management of the hearth was assigned to a specific family member, usually the one with the most experience in temperature control. The hearth itself was kept surrounded by a hearth board or a stone apron that prevented direct contact between hot coals and combustible floor materials. Furthermore, the ash bed was kept a consistent depth. Ash was not just waste, it served as a thermal buffer. By burying a portion of the hot coals in the ash, the lowing could bank the fire, allowing it to smoulder for hours without needing active attention. This ensured that the room remained warm through the night without requiring the constant, risky addition of new logs or charcoal. The kilns thems were centres of technical expertise located on the outskirts of village. The process of converting timber into charcoal was a slow, controlled thermal decomposition. The kiln had to be monitored for days, with the air intake carefully restricted to ensure that the wood carbonized rather than turning to ash. This required a deep understanding of combustion chemistry, long before the formal definition of such concepts. The foresters understood that certain types of wood provided different burning characteristics, and they managed their timber harvests to ensure a steady supply of these specific fuels. It was an industry of precision, where the survival of the village during winter was literally tied to the output of the charcoal kilns. Beyond the hearth, The risk of fire was managed through community-based vigilance. During the winter, when the risk of hearth-related accidents was at its highest, villagers maintained a watch system. A common practice was the periodic sounding of bells or wooden blocks during the night, a signal to the village that the fires were being monitored and that the settlement was alert. This was not only a safety measure, but a way to ensure that any potential fire was detected in its infancy. The communal focus on fire safety, combined with the technical rigour of charcoal production, created a defensive layer against the ever-present danger of fire, allowing the warmth of the home to be enjoyed without the constant fear of catastrophe. Surviving the winter required not only thermal management, but also a robust approach to the physiological stresses placed on the human body. The combination of intense cold, dry air and physical labour led to specific medical challenges, most notably skin trauma and respiratory ailments. In an era before standardized medicine, rural communities relied on a repository of folk wisdom that functioned as a highly practical, localized medical system. The most common ailment was the inflammation caused by cold, specifically shimo, yake, or chilblains. The constant of dampening the feet while working in snow, followed by warming them by the hearth, caused the skin to crack and swell. To treat this, villagers utilized oiled poultices, often derived from camellia seeds or rendered animal fats, which were applied to the skin to lock in moisture and create a barrier against the dry indoor heat. These were not merely soothing balms. They were protective treatments designed to maintain the integrity of the skin barrier, which was vital for preventing infections. For respiratory health, the strategy was to use medicinal teas and herbal infusions. Roots, dried berries, and specific barks were harvested in the autumn and stored for winter use. Ginger and mugwort were common staples, valued for their ability to promote circulation and provide an internal sensation of warmth, which was believed to help the body resist the onset of seasonal illnesses. The management of injury was equally pragmatic. In the isolate mountain villages, professional medic help was rarely available, so every household maintained a basic supply of splints, bandages, and binding materials. The use of fermented soy-based products in the diet was also a core pillar of health, as it provided the probiotic benefits necessary to maintain digestive health when fresh food sources were limited. This was a form of preventative medicine, ensuring that the body was sufficiently fueled and resilient, so that minor issues did not develop into debilitating illnesses that could jeopardize the household's ability to function. Hygiene was also a vital component of this medical strategy. Despite the difficulty of bathing, maintaining the cleanliness of wounds or skin abrasions was strictly managed. Hot water, although limited, was used specifically for cleaning wounds before binding them, and the use of ash-based solutions or certain alkaline botanical mixtures provide a mild antiseptic effect. This medical knowledge was passed down through generations, rooted in the observation of what worked under the pressures of the environment. It was an approach that focused on maintaining homeostasis within the body, ensuring that even under the extreme stress of a freezing winter, the individuals remained functional, healthy, and capable of continuing the labour that kept the community alive. Winter did not bring an end to the necessity of trade. Rather, it transformed the logistics of how goods moved through the rugged Japanese interior. While the deep mountain passes were often rendered impassable for large transport animals or carts, the snowy landscape created a unique opportunity for specialized winter logistics. The consolidation of snow into hard-packed trails, known as kanko, allowed for the use of human-powered sleds. These sleds, constructed from resilient woods like oak and braced with iron, were far more efficient for transporting heavy bundles of charcoal, textiles and preserved foods across frozen terrain than the heavy wheeled carts used in the summer months. The maintenance of these winter trade routes was a critical collective effort. Villages situate along the major mountain arteries were responsible for the grooming of these paths. If a route became blocked by a fresh snowfall or a minor slide, the neighbouring community coordinated to clear it, as the continued flow of trade was essential for all parties. These routes were the arteries through which the products of winter labour, the straw mats, the woven ropes, and the precious charcoal, reached the lowlands. In return, these sleds brought back the vital supplies the mountain lacked: salt, metal for tool forging, and various fabrics that could not be produced at high altitudes. Navigation through the snow passes was a task for the most experienced community members. The trails were often marked by tall wooden stakes or tied off branches to ensure that traders could find their way even during whiteout conditions where the horizon and the ground became indistinguishable. These guides were essential, as the margin for error in sub-zero temperatures was non-existent. A trader who lost their way faced the immediate risk of exhaustion and hypothermia. This trade was not conducted in bursts, but in a steady, rhythmic cycle, dictated by the availability of labour and the condition of the snowpack. This winter commerce fostered a deep independence between the mountain regions and the lowland centres. The lowland markets relied on the consistent output of the mountain villages to keep their own industries supplied, while the mountain villages relied on the lowland centres for raw materials. This network was so well established that even in the depth of midwinter, goods continued to move. The sheer effort required to maintain this trade network serves as a powerful testament to the value placed on economic stability. It was not just about survival. It was about maintaining the flow of goods and services that defined the socio-economic identity of the region, ensuring that despite the isolation imposed by the weather, the communities remained connected and functional. The installation of a Japanese home was not a singular installation, but a multi-layered defense strategy relying on the strategic application of materials like washi paper, hempen textiles, and dense natural plaster. Washi, a resilient fibrous paper made from the inner bark of the kozo shrub, was the unsung hero of winter thermal regulation. Unlike standard paper, washi was treated with persimmon tannin, kakishibu, which acted as a natural waterproofing and strengthening agent. When applied to the sliding shuji screens, this treated paper became a formidable barrier against drafts. The structural genius lay in the precise overlapping of these screens, which prevented air from leaking through the gaps. In the coldest regions, families would apply multi-layers of washi, creating thin, stagnant air pockets that provided surprisingly effective thermal resistance without sacrificing the interior's ability to admit ambient light. The plastering of the even more labour-intensive process, using a mixture of red clay, sand, and chopped rice straw, workers would create a thick thermal mass wall. The straw was crucial. It provided the tensile strength needed to prevent the plaster from cracking during the rapid thermal expansion and contraction cycles of the winter months. A well-applied plaster wool would absorb the ambient heat from the irori during the day, acting as a heat battery that slowly radiated warmth back in the living space during the frigid nights. This wool was often finished with a thin layer of fine clay, ensuring a smooth, airtight surface that minimized air filtration through the structure's porous frame. Floor insulation, often overlooked, was achieved through the use of heavy tatami mats and layered straw padding. A standard tatami mat was not just a floor covering, it was a core of tightly packed dried rice straw wrapped in a woven rush cover. The density of the straw core trapped a significant amount of air, preventing the cold from the earthen floor or the sub-floor crawl space from ducting upward into the living space. When combined with the raised floor structure of the minka, this created a multi-layered barrier against conductive heat loss. Households would often lay additional thick mats or woven hempen rugs in the areas where family members slept, further increasing the resistance to the ground's chill. Beyond the structure elements, the crafting of insulated curtains and partitions was a vital winter industry. Thick quilted hempen cloths, often filled with raw cotton or discard straw fibres, were suspended from the rafters to divide the large open plan rooms into smaller, more easily heated zones. By physically reducing the volume of the space that needed to be warmed, a family could focus their fuel resource on the central hearth area. These partitions were easily adjusted or removed as the household's needs changed throughout the day. This modular approach to insulation meant that the living space was not static, it was a dynamic, adaptable environment that could be reconfigured in real time to match the intensity of the cold outside. Every stitch in the quilted fabric, every layer of clay on the wall, and every sheet of washi on the screen was a deliberate technical decision aimed at maximizing the thermal efficiency of the home, transforming a simple wooden structure into a highly functional heat-retaining fortress against the winter climate. Winter resilience was defined by the capacity of a village to respond to sudden environmental stressors, the most lethal being the avalanche and the prolonged snow lock. While the architecture of the minka was engineered to withstand static snow loads, the dynamic force of a shifting mountainside was an entirely different tactical challenge. Villages located in high-risk zones employed a strategy of landscape modification. This involved the construction of dense, intentional forest buffers, often stands of Japanese cedar or bamboo located on the uphill slopes. These vegetative walls served to break the kinetic energy of snow slides and disperse the accumulation of drifts before they could reach the village perimeter. This was an early form of disaster mitigation, where the environment itself was manipulated to safeguard human habitation. When disaster did strike, the response was governed by a rigid, pre-established chain of command. Every village had a designated snow master, or a committee of elders whose responsibility was to monitor snow accumulation levels and ice stability. If a path was severed or a storage house compromised, the village mobilized in a systematic fashion. The tools used for clearing were not random. They were specialized, light wooden shovels for moving fresh, light snow, and heavy iron, tipped pry bars for breaking down the compacted, ice-heavy slabs that resulted from repeat thaw-freeze cycles. This equipment was stored in communal locations, easily accessible to all able-bodied members of the village, ensuring that there was no delay in the deployment of resources. The logistics of food and fuel rationing during a prolonged snow lock were managed with mathematical precision. In the event that a blizzard lasted longer than the forecasted duration, the village head would implement an immediate emergency distribution protocol. This included the pooling of all remaining firewood and food stocks into single communal supply, which was then doled out to individual household based on size and specific needs. This transition from individual to collective management was a critical survival mechanism. It ensured that no family perished due to poor individual planning. and that the caloric resources were maximized to keep the entire community alive until the mountain passes could be reopened. The mental resilience of the community was bolstered by these established protocols. Panic was viewed as a tactical liability. By adhering to the routines of maintenance, resource tracking, and communal support, the villagers maintained a sense of order that prevented the psychological deterioration often associated with long-term isolation. The focus was always on the next step, the next clearing, the next fire check, the next ration distribution. This compartmentalization of tasks served a dual purpose. It ensured that the physical work of survival was completed efficiently, and it provided a mental anchor, keeping the community anchored in the present moment and focused on the practical reality of their situation. The ability to endure was not just a physical trait, it was an organizational one, embedded in the very structure of village governance and daily discipline. While the winter pantry was primarily stocked with harvested grains and pickled vegetables, the mountain landscape offered a secondary, vital stream of nutrients that required precise foraging techniques. Survival was not merely about waiting for the spring. It was about the active extraction of caloric energy from an environment that appeared dormant. One of the primary winter foraging activities was the harvesting of specific tree barks, mosses, and hardy mountain tubers that remained accessible even under several feet of snow. The inner bark of certain pine and cherry trees, for instance, contained starch, rich layers that could be scraped, dried, and ground into a flour-like substance. This was a labor-intensive operation, requiring the removal of outer bark without damaging the tree's growth. And it provided a crucial filler carbohydrate that extended the life of the village grain reserves. In the frozen rivers and mountain streams, the winter ice, fishing technique was a masterpiece of patient endurance and low energy expenditure. Villagers would identify spots where moving water remained beneath the ice, often near thermal vents or narrow channels where current prevented total freezing. Using thin-hand, forged iron hook sourced from autumn insects, they would bore small holes in the ice. This was not a sport. It was a measured, cold exposure task. The bait was carefully selected to be buoyant and odor, releasing, attracting small mountain trout and char. The catch was immediately flesh, frozen by the ambient air, effectively preserving it until it could be brought to the communal hearth, where it was either dried or incorporated in the daily miso broth to provide essential fats and proteins. Fuel foraging was equally rigorous. Deadfall and standing dry timber in the forests was systematically mapped and retrieved throughout the winter. Villagers used specialized sleds to drag loads of wood back to the village, ensuring they did not rely solely on the stockpile built in autumn. This constant replenishment of the wood supply was a way to maintain a buffer of safety. By keeping the communal woodpile topped up, they ensured that a sudden, unseasonable dip in temperature, which could otherwise drain their resources, would not leave them vulnerable. The act of gathering firewood was also used as a means of patrolling the surrounding woods. It allowed the villagers to check for snow damage to paths, potential avalanche triggers, and the presence of wild game that might have been pushed down from the higher, more exposed peaks. This foraging strategy was governed by a strict ethos of sustainability. The village leaders enforced rules regarding how much bark could be stripped, how many fish could be taken, and which forest sections were off limits. They understood that the forest was a finite resource. By rotating the areas they foraged in, they allowed the ecosystem to recover, ensuring that these life-saving supplements would remain available for future seasons. This management was not based on abstract conservationism, but on a clear-eyed understanding that the forest was the foundation of their winter resilience. Every bit of bark, every fish caught through the ice, and every bundle of wood brought back to the village was a calculated addition to their survival margin, proving that even in the heart of winter, the landscape remained an active participant in the community's ongoing effort to maintain health and stability. The organization of a Minka's interior during the winter was an exercise in extreme spatial efficiency, where every cubic centimetre of heated air was accounted for. The psychology of space was dictated by the centralized heat principle, where the irori acted as the anchor for all domestic functions. During the harshest weeks, the household did not function as a collection of independent rooms, but as a single, unified zone of activity. The expanse's living space was often partitioned using heavy floor to sailing sliding screens or suspended hempen curtains, which effectively collapse the square footage of the house. By walling off unheated corridors and storage zones, the family created a compact dense core where the temperature could be maintained at a comfortable level. Use only the charcoal burning in the hearth. This compression of space forced a shift to psychology, the transition from individual privacy to collective presence. Living in such proximity required a rigid, internalized social contract. Because physical movement was limited, the assignment of tasks was highly structured to avoid interference. One area near the hearth was designated for the meticulous work of tool maintenance and weaving, another for the preparation of food, and a third for the shared sleeping arrangement. This spatial discipline prevented the friction that often arises from cramped quarters. Each family member developed a keen situational awareness, moving with deliberate, minimized gestures to maintain the efficiency of the room. The space was not just a shelter, it was a calibrated environment where the physical layout actively enforced the cooperations necessary for survival. The verticality of the Minka was also utilized as a thermal management tool. The interior was designed with a multi-level floor plan, the doma, earthen floor, and the raised, mat-covered living area. The psychology here was one of thermal zoning. The coldest, most damp air would naturally settle on the earthen floor, making it the area for dirty tasks like wood processing or tool cleaning. The raised living area, which was physically separated from the cold ground, became the clean zone for eating, social interaction, and sleep. This elevation was a physical manifestation of the household's hierarchy and health strategy. By keeping the living area on a raised platform, families physically distanced themselves from the conductive cold, establishing a clear psychological boundary between the hostile environment outs and the protected sanctuary within. The use of light played an equally critical role in this spatial psychology. With windows minimized to prevent heat loss, the interior was often dim, lit primarily by the glow of the hearth. This limited visibility contributed to a slower, more deliberate rhythm of life. The flickering firelight defined the mood of the household, fostering a sense of intimacy and collective focus. It was an environment that naturally suppressed restlessness and encouraged the focus required for the repetitive, long-term labor of the winter months. The space was, in essence, a psychological tool. It was designed to narrow the occupant's focus to the immediate task and the preservation of the fire and the maintenance of their communal bonds. By physically and mentally centering the household around the irori, the design of the Minka ensured that the inhabitant remained aligned in their purpose, the endurance of the season through unity, order, and the meticulous management of their environment. The conclusion of the winter season was never marked by the arrival of a single day of warmth, but by a protracted multi-stage transition that demanded as much logistical rigour as the onset of winter itself. The first indicator of this change was the thaw cycle, a period when the snow began to release the moisture it had held for months. For the Minka, this was a moment of high vulnerability. The primary engineering task was the active management of meltwater. Teams of villagers systematically cleared the stone-lined drainage ditches and culverts that had been buried under snow since December. This was not a passive observation of the thaw, it was a high-intensity manual operation to ensure that the ground around the home's foundation did not become saturated, which would lead to timber rot or structural shifting. As the snowpack receded, the domestic cycle transitioned into the Great Reset. This was a comprehensive, household-wide maintenance protocol that involved dismantling the interior partitions used to retain heat, rolling up the tatami mats to air out the floorboards, and conducting a deep cleaning of the soot-stained rafters. The accumulation of ash and debris from months of constant hearth use was removed and repurposed as fertilizer for the upcoming planting cycle. Every surface of the Minka, from the heavy wooden beams to the earthen doma floor, was inspected for winter-induced damage. The thatch roof, often compacted by the weight of heavy ice, was patched with fresh straw to ensure it would remain waterproof against the spring rains. This was a critical reset. The efficiency of the home as a shelter for the next year depended entirely on the thoroughness of this spring transition. Simultaneously, the agriculture preparation moved into an advanced state of readiness. Long before the fields were fully exposed, families began the nursery phase. In sheltered sun-facing spots along the stone walls of the farmstead, they established small, protected seed beds. These were often covered with mats or simple wooden frames to trap the early spring heat, allowing for the germination of hardy sprouts, even while frost still coated the ground at night. This provided a crucial nutritional bridge, ensuring that by the time the fields were ready for full-scale planting, the community had fresh, nutrient-dense greens to transition away from the heavy, preserved caloric intake of the winter. This early cultivation was a technical safeguard against the possibility of a spring lean, where food stores might run dry before the new harvest matured. The final stage of this transition was the communal restoration of the village infrastructure. This included the repair of irrigation channels, the reinforcement of retaining walls, and the rebuilding of mountain path markers that had been obscured or destroyed by the winters. Wait. It was a time of intense collective labour, where the village functioned as a single unit to re-establish the environmental and logistical systems that supported them. As the last patches of snow vanished and the first signs of green emerged from the soil, the cycle was formally complete. The survival of the community was not a matter of luck, but a reflection of this year-long, disciplined cycle of adaptation, maintenance, and renewal. By embracing the rhythm of the seasons, rather than attempting to force their way through them, the people of ancient Japan had developed a template for existence that allowed them to thrive in one of the most challenging environments in the world. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. Washi is not merely traditional paper, it is a sophisticated engineering achievement in fiber structure and humidity regulation. Unlike Western paper, which typically utilizes short wood fibers through a destructive grinding process, Washi is crafted from the long resilient Barstakozo, mulberry, mitsumata, or gampi shrubs. The production employs the Nagashizuki technique, involving the suspension of these long fibers in a water-based solution containing neri, a mucilaginous agent derived from the tororo aoi root. This viscous medium prevents the fibers from tangling, allowing them to interlock in a multi-directional lattice as the water drains. The result is a sheet of exceptional tensile strength and flexibility that resists tearing even when extremely thin. In architecture, washi functions as a high-performance environmental filter when applied to shoji screens. Its mechanical properties allow it to withstand the structural tension required to remain taut within a wooden frame. Optically, the dense, randous orientation of the fibers diffuses direct sunlight into soft, uniform glow, reducing glare while shield interior spaces from damaging UV radiation. Thermodynamically, washi acts as a hygroscopic regulator. Due to its porous capillary-like fiber structure, the paper absorbs ambient moisture during periods of high humidity and releases it when the air is dry. This passive mechanism aids in stabilizing the room's microclimate, mitigating the risk of mold growth on surround wooden structural members. The durability of washi is further enhanced through chemical treatment with keikishibu, fermented juice of unripe persimmons. The high tannin content in the juice reacts with the cellulose fibers to form a resilient water, repellent polymer coating. This treated washi becomes a formidable barrier against moisture, decay, and insect infestation. Historically, this engineered paper was utilized for dyes applications, range from protective food wrappings and rain-resistant garments to durable wind screens. Within the Minka, washi was never a static element. It was part of a dynamic maintenance cycle. The periodic replacement of shoji paper served as a crucial technical inspection point for the home's air, tightness, and structural integrity. This practice reflects a sophisticated life cycle design philosophy, utilizing biodegradable, renewable materials that can be easily replaced, ensuring that the dwell remains at its peak operational efficiency. Through the mastery of fiber mechanics and natural chemical preservation, washi transformed a simple plant-based material into a versatile tool for structural and environmental control. Fermentation in traditional Japanese society was not merely a culinary preference. It was a sophisticated decentralized biochemical engineering process designed for long-term food stabilization. Without refrigeration, the survival of the village depended on the controlled enzymatic breakdown of raw ingredients into stable, nutrient-dense products. This process was anchored by koji-kin, Aspergillus oryzae, a mold culture that served as the universal catalyst for breaking down complex carbohydrates and proteins in simpler, digestible, and highly preservable forms. The entire village nutritional baseline was essentially managed through the mastery of these micro-biologic environments. The production of miso and shoyu soy sauce represent an advanced application of solid-state fermentation. The process began with a rigorous selection of soybeans, which were steamed, inoculated with koji, and then packed into large cedar vats with salt. The engineering of the vat was as critical as the ingredients themselves. Cedar woods were chosen for its antiseptic properties and its ability to amounts of oxygen to permeate the container, while maintaining a stable interior temperature. This controlled environment encouraged the growth of beneficial lactobacteria and yeasts, which actively outcompeted spoilage organisms. The ages process, which could last from several months to years, was an exercise in patience and environmental monitoring. where the seasonal temperature fluctuations act as a natural regulator for the speed and flavor profile of the fermentation. Tsukemono pickled vegetables utilize a different yet equally effective bioclic pathway, lactic acid fermentation. By submerging vegetable in a brine solution, often augmented with rice bran nuka, villagers created an anaerobic environment that favored the growth of lactobacillus. The acidity produced by these bacteria, combined with the osmotic pressure from the salt, effectively preserved the vegetable for months. The nuka doko, rice bran bed, was a living cyst required daily maintenance, turning the bed ensured oxygen distributions and prevented the accumulation of spoilage bacteria. This was a form of living storage that allowed for the year-round consumption of produce that was only available during specific harvest windows. Beyond basic preservation, this process was a mastery of nutrient concentration. The fermentation process synthesized essential B vitamins and increased the bioavailability of minerals, turning simple agricultural surplus into potent survival ration. The resulting products were resistant to temperature spikes, travel hardy, and required no external energy source to remain edible. This system of biochemical defense allowed communities to survive through periods of scarcity by transforming the raw output of the harvest into a compact, stable, and highly nutritious supply chain. It was a perfect integration of domestic labor, environmental management, and exotic science, demonstrating that the most effective preservators were not mechanical, but biological. The structural integrity of traditional Japanese timber architecture relies on kigumi, an advanced system of interlocking wood joinery that eschews the use of nails or metal fasteners. This engineering approach is predicated on the understanding of wood as a dynamic, living material subject to expansion, contraction, and thermal stress. By employing complex joints, splicing joints, and shiguchi, connecting joints, carpenters create structures that behave as flexible, interconnected systems rather than rigid, brittle frames. The absence of nails is a critical design feature. Metal fasteners would eventually corrode due to moisture or cause the wood to split as it undergoes its natural cycle of swelling and shrinking, whereas wood joints allow for a controlled degree of movement that absorbs energy without failing. At the heart of kigumi is the geometric precision of the interlocking surfaces. Every joint is a calculated fit, designed to distribute mechanical loads across the entire surface area of the intersection. High stress points, such as the connection between columns and roof rafters, utilize intricate configuration like a blind dovetail splice or mochi zakari, wedge tenon. These joints are engineered to become tighter under stress, as the building settles or experience the shifting forces of an earthquake. The geometry of the joint causes it to lock more firmly, maintaining structural stability without compromising the integrity of the individual timbers. This joinery all served a vital role in seismic resilience. Traditional Minka were built to be resilient, not rigid. The flexibility of the kigumi system allows the entire structure to sway and dissipate kinetic energy during tremors, preventing catastrophic structural collapse. In effect, the house acts as a dampened mechanical system. The joints allow for minute shifts measured in millimeters, which prevent the concentration of stress at any single point. This deliberate play in the system is a sophisticated application of structural engineering that keeps the building standing even when the foundation thems are subject to significant smunts. Furthermore, the kigumi system facilitates modularity and repairability. Because the joints secured via wooden pegs shachi, sen rather than permanent fasteners, a building can be disassembled, transported, and reassembled with remarkable efficiency. If a specific structural member suffers from rot or damage, it can be isolated and replaced without requiring the demolition of the entire frame. This longevity is the ultimate goal of Japanese carpentry, creating structures that can last for centuries through iterative maintenance. By prioritizing the geometry of the connection over the permanence of the fastener, the master carpenters of Japan created an architectural legacy that is as sustainable as it is technically brilliant. In the context of rural life, textiles were not mere clothing but high-performance technical equipment. The primary materials, hemp, asa, and cotton, were engineered through rigorous processing cycles to provide essential protection against extreme environmental stressors. Hemp, in particular, was the backbone of rural textile technology due to exceptional tensile strengths and moisture-wicking properties. The production process involved a labor-intensive retting phase, where stalks were soaked in water to break down the pectin, followed by a manual beating process to extract the dural bast fibers. These fibers were then hand-spun into yarn, resulting in a fabric that was remarkably resistant to abrasion and rot, making it ideal for the physical rigors of daily labor. The thermal management of these textiles was achieved through structural layering and density control. During the winter, garments were often constructed using the sashiko technique, a decorative yet highly functional stitching method. By quilting multiple layers of hemp or cotton fabric together with dense parallel running stitches, the workers effectively created a soft insulation layer. This stitching pattern served two purposes. It prevented the layers from shifting or clumping, and more importantly, it trapped microscopic pockets of air between the fabric layers, significantly increasing the garment's thermal resistance, the R value. This allowed the wearer to maintain core body temperature while performing high exertion tasks without the need for bulky, immobile outerwear. Water repellency was engineered through both fiber choice and finishing techniques. Hemp textiles were often treated with local oils or smoke, cured over the hearth. The smoke curing process, while intended to prevent insect damage, also infused the fibers with resins and soot particles that created a semi-permeable, water-resistant barrier. For heaviers clearing snow or handling damp wood, villagers utilized capes or garments reinforced with thick overlapping straw or bark-based mats. This layering system functioned as a technical shell, protecting the inner insulation layers from external saturation. Maintenance was a fundamental part of the textile system's engineering. Garments were designed to be modular and repairable. Worn sections were constantly patched or replaced using remnants from older clothes. This iterative repair process was not just a frugality measure, but a strategic way to high wear areas such as elbows, knees, and shoulders with additional layers of fabric. This created a textile that evolved over time, becoming more robust with use. The end result was a clothing system that offered high durability, excellent moisture management, and adaptable thermal regulation, perfectly aligned with the demanding, unpredictable climate of the Japanese interior. Bamboo, often referred to as the green steel of the Japanese interior, was an essential structural and utilitarian material defined by its unique botanical geometry. Unlike timber, which provides mass, bamboo provides high tensile strengths to weight ratio and exceptional flexibility, making it a critical component of rural engineering. At a microscopic level, bamboo's structure consists of hollow cylindrical culms reinforced by nodes, diaphragms. This design provides extreme resistance to bending and buckling. Rural communities leveraged these properties to create everything from water, conveyance systems to lightweight, high-strength agricultural tools and structural scaffolding. The water conveyance system was perhaps the most sophisticated application of bamboo's engineering potential. By removing the interior nodes using long iron-tipped rods, villagers created seamless continuous conduits, capable of transporting water from mountain springs to village reservoirs and rice paddies over long distances. Because bamboo is naturally resistant to fungal decay when kept constantly submerged or in a flow, through state, these conduits could last for years. The joints between individual bamboo segments were sealed using tight, fitting, friction-based connections, reinforced with straw or resin if necessary, creating a leak-proof hydraulic network that required zero external power to operate. For structural applications, bamboo was treated through a process of starch reduction. By heating the green culms over an open flame or submerging them in a boiling solution of wood ash or salt, villagers removed the sugars and starches present in the fibers. This rendered the material unpalatable to wood-boring insects and increased its resistance to rot. Once treated, the bamboo could be used as a primary structural element in non-load-bearing walls, as lath for plaster, or as flexible roofing substrates. Its ability to bend under pressure without fracturing made it the ideal for roofing structures in areas prone to seismic activity where rigid material might shatter. The utility of bamboo extended into the realm of high-performance tools. Its natural elasticity made it the material of choice for weaving baskets, strainers, and sieves. The processing of bamboo into thin, uniform strips allowed for the creation of baskets with exact aperture sizes, optimized for specific tasks, such as winnowing grain or washing vegetables. These tools were designed for extreme ergonomic efficiency. They were light to reduce operator fatigue, and were naturally permeable, allowing for rapid drying and moisture drainage. Through the precise manipulation of this hollow segment grass, rural community developed a high-tech toolkit that was renewable, easily sourced, and engineered for maximum durability under the most demanding environmental conditions. Urushi, Japanese lacquer, derived from the sap of the Toxicodendron verniciflum tree, is perhaps the most sophisticated biopolymer coating in traditional Japanese technology. Far more than a decorative finish, urushi is a functional engineering material. When applied to wood or fabric, it cures into hardenable and chemically inert film that is impervious to acids, alkalis, moisture, and extreme temperature fluctuations. The core component of the sap, urushiol, undergoes oxidate polymerization in the presence of specific enzymes, lactase, and high humidity. This creates a cross-linked molecular network that makes the material incredibly resistant to both physical abrasion and biological degradation. The mechanics of lacquerware production were centered on the principle of a composite structure. The base material, typically light wood like zelkova or cypress, served as the structural core. Over this, dozens of macroscopic ultra-thin layers of lacquer were applied, each requiring meticulous sanding and curing in a humidity-controlled environment, often referred to as a furo or curing cabinet. This multi-layered approach was not merely for aesthetic depth, it served to effectively seal the substrate. By filling the pores of the wood with the resin, the lacquer prevented the internal moisture content of the wood from fluctuating, thereby stabilizing the item against warping or cracking. This made lacquerware the perfect material for high-perform domestic items like soup bowls, bento boxes, and serving trays that were subject to constant heat, moisture, and acidic food contact. From a material science perspective, urushi exhibits unique adhesion properties. It bonds chemically with the surface of the substrate, essentially becoming part of the object rather than just a top coat. This ensures that the coating does not peel or flake, a critical failure point for lesser resins. Furthermore, the material is naturally anti-bacterial. In the pre-modern era, the use of urushi-coated utensils provided a significant public health advantage, as the surface resisted the growth of pathogens and was easily sanitized. This made it a vital tool for community health, preventing the spread of gastrointestinal illness in high-density rural households. The longevity of lacquerware was also a cornerstone of the repairability culture. If an item was chipped or cracked, it could be restored using fresh urushi, often mixed with powdered gold or silver, the technique known as kintsugi. The lacquer acted as a superior adhesive, creating a bond often stronger than the original material. This practice transformed a broken object into one that was structurally reinforced and aesthetically renewed. By treating lacquer as an engineering component rather than a luxury finish, the rural population ensured that their most essential eating and storage tools could remain in function and service for generations, showcasing a deep understanding of surface science and long-term material resilience. The blacksmithing culture in rural Japan was an exercise in extreme material optimization, where the scarcity of high-quality iron necessitated the development of advanced metallurgical techniques. Rural smiths practiced a form of composite forging, which involved the integration of hard, brittle high-carbon steel for the cutting edge and softer, ductile iron for the tool's body. This sophisticated engineering solution to a complex problem, a solid high-carbon steel tool would be too brittle and prone to shattering under the heavy impact of agricultural labour, while a solid iron tool would lose its edge almost immediately. By welding these two materials together, the smiths created a tool that possessed both the necessary durability to absorb shock and the hardness to maintain a razor-sharp profile. The hardening and tempering process, yaki-aya, was governed by the precise control of phase transformation in steel. The smith would heat the blade to a critical temperature, visually judging the colour to ensure it reached the correct austenitic state before plunging it into water or oil. The cooling rate was the defining variable. It dictated the formation of martensite, the hard, crystalline structure that gives the edge its bite. This was an empirical science passed down through generations, relying on the smith's ability to read the ambient humidity, the mineral content of the water, and the specific impurities within the bloomery steel tamahagane, or local equivalent. The result was a differential hardening. The edge was quenched rapidly to become diamond, hard, while the body remained tempered to be resilient. Beyond forging, the ergonomics of these tools were calibrated to the user's biomechanics. Like the common tool, sickle, or the kuwa hoe were not standardized products. They were custom, fitted to the individual's height, grip, and the specific soil density of their village's terrain. The handle attachments, the tang, were often designed to be replaceable, acknowledging that the wooden handle would inevitably decay or break long before the steel blade. The tang-to-handle fit was an engineering feat of friction and mechanical pressure, ensuring that the tool felt like a natural extension of the user's arm, minimizing energy loss during repetitive motion. Maintenance was deeply ingrained in the tool use cycle. Villagers were skilled in the art of togi, sharpening, using specific graded whetstones to maintain the edge geometry without removing unnecessary material. A tool was only as effective as its sharpness, and the daily ritual of honing was a vital part of the work rhythm. This system created a feed loop between the smith and the user. The smith would observe how the blade wore down or chipped, and then adjust the necked forging to compensate for those specific environmental demands. This iterative optimization meant that rural tools were not static artifacts, but constantly evolving technologies, refined over decades to provide maximum mechanical advantage with minimal weight, proving that traditional craftsmanship was as much about material science and ergonomic design as it was about the art of the forge. Lighting in the pre-modern Japanese household was an engineering challenge involving the efficient combustion of vegetable-based fuels. Because high-quality mineral oils were not available, rural communities developed a sophisticated system centered on the extraction and refinement of oils from seeds such as rapeseed, nanohane, camellia, and cottonseed. These oils served as the primary chemical energy source for both illumination and, occasionally, the maintenance of wooden implements. Anden portal paper lanterns, or tomio open, flame lamps, were designed to maximize luminous efficiency while minimizing fuel consumption, a necessity given the labor-intensive nature of oil extraction. The Anden was a masterclass in function design. It consisted of a light wooden frame covered in washi paper, which served two crucial purposes. It acted as an acoustic and thermal shield against drafts, and it functioned as a light diffuser. By placing open flame inside this enclosure, the flickering of the lamp was suppressed, creating a steady, soft light that was ideal for detailed work like sewing or reading. The paper also helped to contain the smoke and soot produced by the combustion, preventing it from staining the entire room. The placement of the flame was height adjustable, allowing the user to focus the light precisely on the task at hand, thereby conserving fuel by not lighting the entire environment unnecessarily. Combustion management was focused on the wick engineering. Wicks were typically made from the pith of the soft rush, Juncus effusus, chosen for its consistent capillary action. The height of the wick relative to the oil surface was the primary control mechanism for light intensity and smoke production. If the wick was too high, incomplete combustion would lead to excessive soot, which had to be carefully collected. As it was a key ingredient for high-quality ink, if too low, the flame would be insufficient for visibility. The maintenance of this wick was a daily technical ritual, requiring the user to periodically trim the charred tips to ensure a clean, stable burn. The management of oil was integrated in the broader village economy. Rapeseed, once harvested, was pressed in wooden screw presses to yield the raw oil, which then underwent a rudimentary clarification process, often involving settling and filtering through layers of charcoal and fibre to remove impurities that would otherwise cause clogging and excessive smoke. The waste product, the oilseed cake, was a high nitrogen byproduct used as a vital fertilizer for the next crop cycle. This circular system ensured that the resource requirements for lighting were not just extracted, but effectively recycled. By mastering the chemistry of vegetable oils and mechanics of combustion, the rural household created a sustainable, reliable and highly controlled illumination system that defined the rhythms of the evening hours. Charcoal, sumi, was the primary thermal energy source for the Minka, and its production was industrial-scale operation managed by rural communities. Burning, which results in efficient high-smoke combustion. The process of charcoal making is a controlled anaerobic pyrolysis. Villagers constructed semi-permanent kilns, typically dug into mountain hillsides and lined with stone and clay. These kilns were engineered to manage airflow with extreme precision. The goal was to heat the wood, usually dense hardwoods like kunugi, to high temperatures above 400 degrees Celsius, while strictly limiting oxygen. This process drives off the water, tars and volatile compounds, leaving behind a highly concentrated carbon fuel. The engineering of the kiln was critical to the final quality of the charcoal. The white charcoal, binchoten, method, for example, required a specific finishing phase. Near the end of the carbonization process, the kiln temperature was rapidly increased to over degrees Celsius by opening the air vents. The charcoal was then extracted while glowing red, hot and covered with a mixture of earth, ash and sand. This rapid cooling quenched the carbon, resulting in an exceptionally hard, dense material that produced a high caloric, long, burning heat with virtually no smoke or odour. This level of quality control transformed wood from a bully, low-efficiency fuel into a refined, high-performance energy source that could be easily stored, transported and utilized in delicate indoor environments like the irori. Logistical management extended to the forest itself. Charcoal production relied on a system of coppicing, the practice of cutting back trees to ground level, which stimulated rapid regrowth of straight, uniform stems. This was an early form of sustainable energy farming. By cycling through forest zones, the village ensured a continuous supply of wood without ever clear, cutting the landscape. This prevented soil erosion on mountain slopes and maintained the health of the watershed. The work was divided into phases: harvesting, seasoning the wood, constructing the kiln, managing the multi-day firing process, and finally the delicate extraction and sorting of the product. Beyond its use as fuel, charcoal was a vital engineering material. It was used as a dehumidifier in storage areas, water filter for purifying spring water, and even as a soil amendment to improve aeration and nutrient retention in fields. Because it is highly porous and chemically stable, it functioned as an effective adsorbent for odours and toxins. The production cycle of charcoal was thus an integrated system that converted raw forest biomass into multifunctional technological asset. By mastering the thermodynamics of pyrolysis, the rural community achieved a degree of energy independence that was central to their ability to endure the long, isolated winters. The concepts of kintsugi, golden joinery, and motenai, regret over waste, represent the culmination of Japanese material culture. They are not merely aesthetic preferences, but a rigorous engineering philosophy centered on the extension of an object's service life through high precision repair. In a society where resource, from metal to timber to lacquer, were finite and difficult to harvest, the premature disposal of a function object was considered a failure of both craftsmanship and logistics. Repair was therefore elevated from a chore to a technical discipline. Kintsugi specifically addressed the failure mechanics of brittle materials like ceramics. When a ceramic vessel fractures, it loses its structural integrity. Kintsugi repairs this by using urushi lacquer, mixed with powdered gold, silver or platinum. From a mechanical standpoint, this is an advanced adhesive application. Urushi, as previously noted, forms a powerful flexible bond that is chemically inert and highly durable. By reinforcing the fracture line with precious metal, the repair does not merely hide the damage, it enhances the structural integrity of the vessel while acknowledging its history. The repair turns a potential failure point in the strongest part of the object. Motenai functions as the overarching system framework for this philosophy. It is an economic and ecological principle that mandates the optimization of an object's life cycle. This mindset drove development of modularity in tools as seen in the replaceable handles of iron implements, and the circularity of material usage, such as repurposing ash for fertilizer or old textiles for quilted insulation. The goal was to maintain every tool, garment, or structure in a state of perpetual operational readiness. If an object broke, the engineering response was to restore it to service, not to replace it. This philosophy of repair drastically reduced the village's reliance on external raw materials. By continuously iterating on the design of repairs, craftsmen gained deep insights into why objects failed, which in turn formed the creation of stronger, more durable original designs. This created a virtuous cycle. The act of repairing became a form of research and development. Through Kinmotainai, the rural Japanese community transformed the inevitability of wear and tear into an opportunity for technical innovation, ensuring that their limited resource provided the maximum possible utility over the longest possible time. The administrative stability of the traditional Japanese village, or mura, was maintained not through centralized authority, but through a high-precision, consensus-based governance model known as the Mura Hachibu system. This was essentially a sophisticated mechanism of social and operational regulation, designed to ensure the survival of the collective unit in a challenging environment. The village council, typically composed of the heads of established households, functioned as the primary executive body responsible for logistical planning, conflict resolution, and the maintenance of communal infrastructure. Their authority was rooted in the collective adherence to shared labor protocols, the essential maintenance of irrigation channels, mountain paths, and fire prevention zones. The governance structure operated on a principle of total transparency and accountability. Decisions were made via ringi, consensus building, before any action was taken. This ensured that every household, which was a unit of production and consumption, was fully aligned with the village strategic goals, whether that was the timing of the rice harvest or the management of communal forests. Because the community was highly dependent on shared resource, individual deviation from established standards could jeopardize the entire system. Thus, the system prioritized the minimization of risk through strict adherence to proven, collective best practices. The term Mura Hachibu, village ostracism, was the extreme enforcement mechanism for these regulations. It was essentially the systematic withdrawal of cooperation from a household that refused to comply with community-wide safety or logistical standards. In an environment where survival required constant collaborative effort, from the shared maintenance of the dam to the collective firefighting protocol, being excluded from the village's logistical network was not just a social inconvenience, it was an existential threat. This system functioned as a high-stakes regulator that enforced compliance with the technical and safety protocols required to sustain the village. While punitive in nature, the core function of this system was to maintain internal harmony, and function continuity. By tying social standing directly to one's contribution to communal engineering and logistical tasks, the village ensured that every member had a stake in the infrastructure's performance. This centralized governance model allowed for rapid local adaptation to environmental changes, such as unexpected droughts or floods, without waiting for directives from a distant central government. Through this system of self-regulation, the rural Japanese village achieved an extraordinary degree of administrative resilience, balancing the needs of the individual household with the survival imperative of the entire community. Agriculture engineering in the Japanese landscape was defined by the necessity of maximizing yield from limited, often fragmented, arable land. Faced with rugged terrain and restricted flat plains, communities developed an early and sophisticated form of precision agriculture. This involved the intensive engineering of the topography itself, most notably through the creation of terraced fields, tanada. These terraces were not just simple steps, they were complex hydraulic structures designed to control their flow of water and gravity, ensuring that each level received consistent hydration and nutrient deposition. The hydraulic system of these terraces relied on a sophisticated understanding of water pressure and flow rates. Gravity-fed channels, often lined with compacted clay or stones, directed mountain spring water across multiple tiers. The engineering challenge was to prevent erosion while allowing for the precise saturation of the soil profile. Villagers implemented overflow weirs and spillways that could be manually adjusted based on seasonal demand, a system that effectively allowed for the control of the fields. Microclimate. By managing the water column height, they could regulate soil temperature and the availability of dissolved nutrients, which was critical during the critical germination and maturation phases of rice production. For cultivation on marginal land, traditional farmers utilized a form of liquid fertilization and hydroponic adjacent practices. Soil fertility was managed through the diligent recycling of nitrogen, rich household waste, animal manure, and composted plant matter, which was carefully diluted and distributed into the irrigation stream. This technique ensured that nutrients were delivered direct to the root zone, minimizing waste and preventing the excessive nutrient run that often plagues modern farming. This closed-loop system of nutrient cycling allowed for continuous, multi-generational farming of the same plots without the depletion of soil minerals. Furthermore, these farmers employed advanced crop rotation and intercropping strategies based on rigorous observation of plant biology. By alternating rice with nitrogen, fixing crops or deep-rooted vegetables, they maintained the soil's physical structure and chemical balance. These methods were highly refined. Farmers utilized specialized tools to transplant seedlings with exact spacing, a technique that optimized photosynthesis and air circulation. This intense, manual labor-focused agricultural model was, in essence, a high-tech survival strategy. It transformed the landscape into controlled rattery, where every cubic meter of water and soil was calibrated to output maximum caloric value with high efficiency, proving that the foundation of Japanese agricultural success was not just hard work, but deep scientific observation of the natural environment. In the infrastructure of rural Japan, rope nawana was the foundational connector, a critical engineering component, used in everything from timber frame construction and bridge building to agriculture securing and domestic storage. The production of these ropes was a precise study in fiber mechanics and tensile strength engineering. The primary material was rice straw, which, after the harvest, was systematically processed to remove husks and soften the fibers. The quality of the final product was determined by the twist geometry, the number of turns per centimeter, and the diameter of the rope, which dictated its overall strength and ability to withstand environmental exposure. The manufacturing process involved a specialized tool called a nawa-uchi rope twisting device. By rotating the fibers in a consistent mechanical fashion, the craftsman ensured an even distribution of tension across all strands. A stand rope was constructed by twisting individual strands konawa into larger multi-ply rope. This creates a balanced non-twisting structure if the individual strands are twisted in one direction, S-twist, and then plied together in the opposite direction, Z-twist. the resulting rope gains significant dimensional stability. This is the same mechanical principle used in modern steel cable manufacturing, demonstrating that traditional rope makers had an empirical mastery of torque and load distribution. The engineering utility of these ropes was enhanced by the physical properties of the straw itself. Rice straw contains high levels of silica, which provides a natural degree of water resistance and protection against fungal rot. Furthermore, rural rope makers developed specific braiding profiles for different load bear requirements. A flat braid provided high surface friction for bundling heavy timber, while a tight-wound, thick-gauge rope was optimized for high tensile strength in suspension applications, such as the famous kazurabashi vine and rope bridges found in mountainous regions. These bridges were marvels of civil engineering. They utilized the high tensile strength of twisted fibers to span deep gorges, with the design allowing for a degree of controlled flexibility that prevented the structure from snapping under high wind loads or shifting weight. Maintenance of these rope-based systems was part of the village's wide infrastructure cycle. Because organic fibers are subject to weathering, critical structural ropes were replaced on a scheduled basis, often annually or biannually. This was an early form of preventative maintenance, where infrastructure was systematically inspected and replaced before failure could occur. By treating rope not as a disposable item, but as a high-performance mechanical element, rural communities create a robust and reliable system of connectivity. It was a sophisticated application of natural fiber science, proving that complex structural demands could be met with simple, newer materials when combined with precise mechanical design and disciplined life-cycle management. The coloration of textiles in traditional Japan was a sophisticated branch of applied chemistry, functioning as both a protective finish and a cultural identifier. Rather than relying on simple pigments that coat the surface, traditional dyeing processes utilized chemical reactions to bond colorants directly in the fiber structure, a process known as mordanting, were derived from locopanical sources: indigo, sukumo for blues, madder, acane for reds, and gardenia for yellows. The engineering challenge lay in the extraction of these pigments, and more importantly, the creation of a chemical bridge between the plant-based dye and the cellulose of hemp or cotton fibers, which are notoriously difficult to bond with. The indigo fermentation process was a masterpiece of biological and chemical engineering. Unlike thatched dyes that rely on synthetic reduction, traditional indigo required the development of a living, anaerobic bacterial environment in large vats. Daily monitoring of pH levels and temperature to keep the bacteria, which convert the insoluble indigo pigment into water, soluble leucoform, alive and active. The dyer had to be an expert in microbial management. The vat was effectively a bioreactor. When the fabric was submerged and then exposed to the air, the oxidation process caused the indigo to revert to its insoluble, vibrant blue state, locking it permanently in the fiber. Mordanting was the critical chemical phase of the process. Since naturally attract most plant jays, dyers used metal salts, often derived from iron, rich mud dorism or alum, to act as a molecular anchor. The metal ions created a chelate bridge between the dye molecule and the fiber, ensuring that the color was not only vibrant but also light, fast and wash fast. By varying the mordant, a single source of plant dye could produce a vast spectrum of shades. For example, the same dye bath would produce a soft grey with an iron mordant, or a warm brown with a copper-based one. Beyond aesthetics, this chemical treatment served important functional purpose. Many of the natural dyes, particularly indigo, possessed inherent antimicrobial and insect repellent properties. Indigo dyed clothing provided a subtle chemical-based protection against skin infections and deterred pests, a crucial advantage for farm workers who spent long hours in damp insect-prone environments. The dye integrates system of surface science, biology and pharmacology. By mastering the chemical interactions between botanical pigments, metal, salt mordants and fiber substrates, rural communities created textiles that were technologically advanced, durable, and environmentally optimized for the demands of their daily labor. The Kura storehouse was the high-security engineering solution to the problem of long-term asset protection in the Japanese rural landscape. Designed to safeguard precious resources such as family heirlooms, rice reserves, and essential tools from the twin threats of fire and humidity, the Kura was constructed using advanced dozo, earthen wall architecture. The structural core consisted of a massive timber frame, which was then encased in multiple thick layers of mud plaster. This plaster was typically in straw with charcoal and sometimes fibers, creating a wall system that provided an exceptional level of thermal inertia and fire resistance. The fire suppression mechanism of the Kura was based on the physical properties of the earth, plaster. When exposed to extreme external heat, the water trapped within the thick plaster layers would undergo a phase change, absorbing massive amounts of energy as it evaporated, which prevented the internal temperature of the structure from reaching the ignition point of the stored materials. Furthermore, the Kura was designed with heavy door technology. The entrance utilized a series of interlocking, overlapped door seals and an extremely thick mud plaster construction, which effectively hermetically sealed the interior against heat sparks and oxygen ingress during a fire. Humidity regulation was the second pillar of Kura engineering. The interior climate had to remain stable to prevent the rot of stored textiles and the germination of seed reserves. This was managed through the high thermal mass of the thick walls, which buffered the interior against daily and seasonal temperature fluctuations. The construction was often slightly raised off the ground on stone foundations to prevent moisture transfer from the soil. The interior finish, often smooth, polished plaster, was designed to be easily cleaned and to resist the absorption of dampness. In many Kura, the windows were kept to a minimum and were shuttered with the same thick, fire-resistant design as the doors, allowing for controlled ventilation only when the external air conditions were favorable. The Kura was a testament to passive infrastructure. It functioned with external energy or active systems, relying entirely on material science, the thermal conductivity of earth, the insulating properties of wood, and the structural integrity of the timber frame. The construction process itself was a multi-year project involving the gradual layering and drying of plaster to prevent cracking. This dedication to structural durability meant that a well-maintained Kura could stand for centuries, serving as a permanent climate-controlled vault that anchored the wealth and security of the household. It stands as a perfect example of how traditional engineering utilized natural materials to create robust, long-term environmental protection. The irori, sunken hearth, was the central node of the Minka, functioning as an integrated thermal management and air filtration system. It was far more than a simple fire pit. Its placement and design were dictated by the thermodynamics of natural convection. By positioning the hearth in the floor of the main living space, the residents utilized the stack effect to manage the indoor environment. As the fire burned, the rising hot air heated the ceiling timbers and the floor above in lofted spaces, while the smoke, rich in resins from the burning wood, was channeled upward to naturally preserve the structural bamboo and thatch of the roof from insects and fungal decay. The thermal efficiency of the irori was maximized through the use of a jizagi, adjustable pot hook. This device allowed for precise control of the cooking temperature by varying the distance between the pot and the flame, serving as a mechanical thermostat. The heavy iron hook suspended from a ceiling beam not only held the cookware, but also acted as a thermal battery, absorbing and radiating heat back into the central living area even after the fire had died down. This was a critical component in maximizing the energy output of limited fuel supplies. Air circulation was carefully calibrated through the strategic placement of moya, structural gaps, and the permeability of the roof structure. The roof was designed to be breathable. The thick thatch allowed for a slow, steady exchange of air, which prevented the buildup of carbon monoxide while ensuring that the smoke did not saturate the living level of the room. The smoke was thus utilized as a chemical preservative for the upper reaches of the house, while the lower, breathable living space remained relatively clear. This dual-layer atmosphere was a sophisticated application of fluid dynamics, keeping the residents comfortable while simultaneously the building's structural health. The irori also functioned as a social and operational hub for village logistics. The heat provided a consistent, dry environment for drying food, repairing tools, and keeping materials like ropes and nets supple and ready for use. By concentrating the thermal output in a single location, the household achieved a highly efficient energy budget. The irori was the heart of a closed-loop system where combustion, cooking, structural preservation, and climate control were all managed through a single point of technical intervention. It is a striking example of how rural engineering turned a necessary hazardous force fire into a controlled, multifunctional tool for domestic survival. Part 37. Water management was the lifeblood of the agrarian economy, requiring a sophisticated civil engineering approach to gravity-fed distribution. The primary challenge was the effective transport of water from high-altitude streams or rivers down to the terraced paddy fields without inducing erosion or causing water loss due to seepage. The solution was the Yozui irrigation canal system, a complex net of conduits particularly graded to maintain a constant, slow-moving flow. These channels were engineered with a specific gradient geometry to ensure that the kinetic energy of the moving water remained low, preventing the degradation of the canal walls. The construction of these canals relied on the Tamari stilling basin and Siki weir system. The weir was a semi-permeable barrier, often constructed of bamboo, stone, and bundled straw, designed to divert a fraction of streams flow into the main canal without obstructing the natural course of the water, which would have risked upstream flooding. The engineering of the weir was a fine balance. It had to be robust enough to withstand seasonal surges, yet sacrificial enough that it would break away during extreme flood events, thereby preventing the destruction of the permanent irrigation infrastructure downstream. Precision control of water distribution within the fields was achieved through the hikuchi sluice gate and the masu measuring box. The sluice gate, often a simple sliding wooden board, allowed for the incremental regulation of water levels. By observing the water surface height, farmers could use the measuring box to distribute exact volumes of water to different field tiers. This was critical for rice cultivation, which required specific depth-dependent water coverage to manage temperature and nutrient uptake. The ability to manipulate these gates allowed the entire village to function as a unified hydraulic entity, with water shared equitably according to the specific needs of each field's development stage. Finally, the maintenance of this hydraulic network was a core pillar of the village's collective labour agreement. The entire system, from the headwaters to the final drainage outlet, was inspected and cleared of silt following every major rain event. This civil maintenance prevented the accumulation of debris that could cause stagnant pools or blockages. Through the integration of simple but effective hydraulic components, sluice gates, and calibrated canals, rural communities transformed the unpredictable flow of mountain water into a stable, reliable resource. It was a triumph of small-scale civil engineering that allowed for the intensive and sustainable cultivation of land that would otherwise have been too difficult to farm. In the post-harvest phase, the primary logistical bottleneck was the efficient separation of grain from chaff, a process known as winnowing. To solve this, rural engineer developed the tatami winnowing machine, a sophisticated application of fluid dynamics and mechanical leverage. The tatami was a box-like apparatus equipped with an internally mounted hand-cranked fan. By manually rotating the fan, the operator generated a controlled laminar airflow that was directed horizontally through the grain as it fell from an upper hopper. The engineering brilliance of the tatami lay in its ability to manipulate the density-dependent separation of materials. The grain, being heavy and dense, would fall vertically into a collection bin, while the lighter chaff and dust were carried away by the air current and expelled from the rear of the machine. This was a significant technological leap over the traditional method of tossing grain into the air and relying on unpredictable natural breezes. By creating a portable, reliable, and on-demand wind source, the tatami allowed for winnowing to be performed regardless of the weather conditions indoors or out, vastly increasing the processing throughput during the harvest season. The mechanics of the fan itself were a marvel of efficient wood construction. The blades were shaped and angled to optimize air velocity, and the internal housing was contoured to minimize turbulence, ensuring that the airflow remained consistent across the entire width of the machine. This required precise alignment of the drive axle and the bearings, often made of hard, friction-resistant woods, to ensure smooth rotation over thousands of cycles. The entire apparatus was designed to be easily disassembled for cleaning, acknowledging that the buildup of dust and plant debris would otherwise eventually jam the mechanism. This technology represents an early, successful attempt at automating a repetitive agricultural task through the mechanical control of air. By understanding the principles of wind speed and object density, rural communities effectively industrialized the winnowing process. The tatami was not just a tool, it's a calibrated wind tunnel that allowed for the high-precision refinement of the crop. This mastery of airflow and mechanical leverage was essential for maintaining the caloric throughput of the village, turning a laborious, time-sensitive task into a manageable and efficient part of the agricultural work cycle. Bridge construction in rural Japan was a high-stakes engineering endeavor necessitated by the geography of steep-sided mountain valleys and fast-flowing volatile rivers. The design philosophy was rooted in structural resilience, the ability of a bridge to survive the massive hydrodynamic forces of flood events which often destroyed rigid stone or heavy timber structures. Rural engineers embraced flexibility, developing designs like the Kazurabashi, vine suspension bridge, and the hanebashi, cantilever bridge. These structures were designed to accommodate movement, deforming under load or water pressure, without reaching the threshold of catastrophic failure. The kazurabashi is the immense tensile strength of mountain vines, specifically Shirakuchi kazura, a type of hardy wisteria. These vines were bundled into thick load, bury cables and anchored deep in the mountainside using large buried timber dead men. From an engineering perspective, this was a pre-stressed suspension system. The bridge deck, made of light wooden slats, was lashed directly to these primary cables. The inherent elasticity of the vines allowed the bridge to sway and absorb the energy of high winds, while the lack of a rigid, broad-faced profile allowed water to pass underneath and around the structure during flash floods. If the bridge was threatened by extreme conditions, the modular deck could be rapidly unlashed, leaving only the primary cables, which were highly resistant to damage. In regions where a more permanent, heavy traffic crossing was required, engineers utilized the cantilever hanebashi design. This architecture relies on horizontal timbers that extend from both banks, with each layer projecting further inward than the one below, effectively stepping the bridge out to the center. This design solved the problem of creating long spans without the need for massive midstream piers, which would have been vulnerable to being washed away by river debris. The cantilevered arms were often counter-weighted by heavy stone abutments, using gravity to stabilize the entire structure. The result was a rigid, high-load capacity bridge that stood well above the high water line. These bridge designs were masterpieces of site-specific engineering. The choice of materials, vines, local hardwoods, or stone, was dictated by the specific requirements of the span and the environmental risks of the site. Maintenance was constant, treated as an essential village-wide security protocol. Because these bridges were the only way to move goods and people across the mountainous terrain, their structural integrity was directly tied to the village's economic viability. By utilizing flexible, regenerative materials and gravity-based structural principles, rural engineer built a network of crossings that were as durable as they were ingenious, proving that survival in the mountains depend on building with the environment, not against it. Is far more than a floor covering. It is a precisely engineered modular system that defines the spatial geometry of the Minka. Woven from soft rush igusa, wrapped around a core of compressed rice straw, the mat functions an acoustic insulator, a thermal regulator, and a standardized unit of measure. The engineering of the tatami is centered on dimensional consistency. Because the mats are manufactured in standardized sizes, originally based on the dimensions of a human body in a reclining position, they serve as the architectural grid for the entire house. This system allows for the seamless interchangeability of mats and dictates the exact placement of walls, sliding doors, shuji fusuma, and structural pillars. From a structure perspective, the rice straw core is a high-performance, multi-layered laminate. Thousands of individual straw stems are compressed into thick, dense board, which is then encased in the woven rush cover. This construction provides excellent thermal insulation, keeping the room warm during the winter by trapping air within the porous straw structure. Simultaneously, the rush cover is highly hygroscopic. It absorbs excess moisture from the air during humid summers, maintaining a comfortable relative humidity within the living space, and then releases that moisture when the air becomes dry. This is a passive climate control system that functions without any external energy input. The geometry of the mat laying pattern, tatami shiki, is a critical technical consideration. Mats are never placed in a grid-aligned cross pattern, as this creates a structural weakness where four corners meet, a site for potential fraying and instability. Instead, they are arranged in specific interlocking configurations, shujishiki, that ensure the edges are braced against one another. This layout is not just for aesthetic harmony. It reinforced the floor plane, ensuring that the mats remain stable underfoot and providing a consistent surface for movement. The edges are bound with cloth borders, heri, which serve the engineering purpose of preventing the rush weave from unravelling under the friction of daily use. Furthermore, the tatami system acts as a modular building code. Because the structural dimensions of the house are always multiples of the tatami size, the entire architectural footprint is predetermined. This standardization simplifies construction, as components can be pre-fabricated to fit the grid, and it allows for the modular repurposing of space. A room can be expanded or contracted by adding or removing mats, shifting the interior layout to match the changing needs of the household. Through this integration of material science, the moisture-regulating, rush and insulating straw, and geometric standardization, the tatami becomes the foundation technology of the Japanese interior, transforming a simple woven mat in the governing architecture of the home. Sleepy History with Benedict is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.